This is my monster truck, Aggravated Assault. So I've been working on this truck for a long time, like 2 years about, and I built this whole truck by myself in this shop. Many late nights working on this thing, but it's finally ready. I just have a couple little things to do with, just a couple safety features to add on, but this truck, pretty much, it's mechanically ready to go. Looks kind of funny sitting in the little tires. Those are called transport tires. They're on there to transport it in the trailer or bring it from inside the shop outside. It's also a lot easier to work on with the small tires as opposed to the big 66-inch tall tires. So these are BKTs. Originally I was going to put Firestones on here, but a friend of mine had these BKTs and he gave them at a price I couldn't turn down, so I went with these for now. I had the wheels built brand new by Racehorse, and then I had them powder coated. These are true beadlock wheels. What that means is this red ring right here, this part, clamps the tire to the inner rim, so if you hit the sidewall hard, it's not going to pop off the rim. And then also on the back side of the wheel, that's what's called a stiffening ring, the part that says Racehorse. That just makes the wheel stronger, so when you go over jumps, if you hit hard, you don't bend the rim. Or you could still bend it, you're just less likely. So that's a fiberglass body made by a company called Fiberworks. It's a Chevy Silverado trophy truck. In my opinion, Fiberworks makes the best looking body as far as trophy trucks go. The reason I went with this body was because this chassis has a long wheelbase, and this body was like the perfect wheelbase. Plus, I really like trophy trucks. I think they look cool. It's a really good looking truck. Also has a lot of good visibility. Some bodies look cool, but when you sit in the cab, you lose a lot of visibility. This thing has high visibility, and the more you can see, the better. So right now it's just the white gel coat that it came with when it was made, but my friend's coming pretty soon to paint it. It's going to have a really nice paint scheme. I've got a few renderings, and I'm pretty sure which one I'll go with, so hopefully in the next few weeks he'll be painting it. So the first thing I did, the first step in building the monster truck, was I got the chassis. I had the chassis built by Concussion Motorsports out of Ellis Grove, Illinois. And in the past, I've built my own chassis, but nowadays, as crazy as these monster trucks are and the things they do and the way the rest of the technology has advanced so much in the last few years, you really want to get a chassis from an experienced builder. So instead of building my own, I went with the Concussion chassis. The way I settled on the Concussion chassis was originally I was just going to get his axle housings, and then we started talking, and so I ended up getting the housings, the chassis, and a few other parts from him. He's a really great guy, Concussion Motorsports. They build some awesome monster trucks, top of the line parts. They'll do anything from small parts to a complete turnkey truck. So I got the axle housing and then the chassis. Next thing I did was I got the shocks. So these are the shocks, 26-inch travel front, 30-inch travel rear, and these are made by Racehorse. He's the one who built the wheels. And these shocks, when you look at them, you would think there would be a spring in there, but they're actually filled with nitrogen. Nitrogen is like the spring. It's kind of like putting air in a shock, but if you put air in, air changes a lot with heat, like temperature, and because these shocks have right here make friction, friction turns to heat, and it could change the air pressure, so they run off nitrogen. Nitrogen is less affected by temperature. So it's 30 inches of travel in the rear, 26 in the front. The reason you want a little less in the front is because if you had 30-inch travel front and rear, when you hit the throttle, the front end would rise so much, it'd be hard to see where you're going. So 26 and 30 is like the standard. It works well. Engine is just the standard monster truck engine, which is a 540 cubic inch, big block Chevy based engine, all aftermarket parts. Littlefield standard helix blower. So there's a standard helix, high helix. Most rule books only want you to run a standard helix. I'll explain that in another video, which would take way too long. This would be like an hour-long video if I talked about it now, but it's running Enderley mechanical injection. A lot of trucks are going to Holley EFI, but the problem is I do this as a hobby. It's not anything I do for like money or a business or anything like that. So this truck's going to sit for a bit. So I decided to go with the reliability of the Enderley mechanical. Right there, the header, it's just got a little muffler on the end. I made those. I got a kit, a stainless steel header kit from a company called Stainless Steel Header Manufacturing. It came with a bunch of bends, flanges, and I just had to cut the bends up, TIG weld them together. Let's get that little muffler, just because a lot of places want you to run the muffler. So horsepower on this thing's like 1,500 horse. That's about standard for a monster truck. You don't want to go any higher than that, because that's when you start breaking parts. And also, if you go too high horsepower like they used to in like the 90s, they were putting like top fuel dragster motors in these monster trucks. It took it out of its proper power band. Like it made big power at high RPM, but down low where you want in a monster truck, just didn't have it. So it's like, it seemed like the lower horsepower trucks were actually going faster and doing better than the real high horsepower trucks and braking a lot less. So 1400, 1500 horsepower, run on alcohol is like the perfect combo. Right there's a Hughes Power Glide transmission. They call it a Power Glide, but really not much Power Glide about it. It's Power Glide based. Aftermarket case, large input-output shaft, billet internals. And that's their Hughes Pro Mod transmission, rated for over 4,000 horsepower. So if it can handle a 4,000 horsepower Pro Mod, and those things got big tires that just hook up, take off like a shot, it should definitely stand up to this monster truck. Transmission goes to the Profab transfer case, also called the drop box. Just a bunch of gears, it's quick change. Right now it's 1-to-1. I start with that and then change it as I go, just play around with different ratios. And then just like a normal 4x4 drive shaft, connects to the axle housing. I still have to make the drive shaft cage. I'm just waiting on some parts for that. That's one of the safety features I still have to do. So a couple little things to button up on this truck. So right there are the concussion motorsports housings I mentioned earlier. And honestly, what first made me want the concussion housings just because they looked awesome. I'll admit that. That's usually not what you want to do when you're deciding what parts you want. But when you look at something like this and it looks cool, it draws your attention, and that's what made me look into them. And one awesome feature is this piece right here. This is an inspection cover, and this comes off. Nice thing about having that removable is if there's a problem with like the gears or something, or maybe some carrier bolts loosened up, you can pop that cover off, tighten up before something completely blows. And also these trucks, these axles hold a lot of gear oil, and having that cover removable just makes it really easy to fill. So concussion housings are awesome. So that's the housing. Now as far as the gear sets go, you have a center section right there, just like you would have on like a 4 9-inch axle. Then you also have these planetaries right here. There's an extra gear set in there. So I'll show you how those work. So when you get this axle housing, it comes up to this flange right here. And this is a nice thing about the concussion housings. They use a big 2-inch flange. And that bolts this piece, which is called a champagne, and then a knuckle. They call it a champagne because it looks like a champagne glass. So these ones are aftermarket ones made by a company called Gearhart Engineering. That guy's stuff is insane. It blows my mind the way he makes these. These things can take a landmine. They're insanely strong. So I'll show you what the stock ones look like. So that's the champagne and the knuckle. And that's a stock champagne and knuckle. So you can see, looks like a champagne glass. Right there's the knuckle. So taking a look at that, it's round right there. And this is real strong too. This is off of like big heavy equipment. But you can see the Gearhart ones are much stronger, and they have extra bolts. So the way this works is, this bolts to the housing. Right here's another assembly. So this whole assembly will bolt to the housing with that flange. Right here is the spindle. This is a stock spindle. So I run aftermarket spindles. So this spindle bolts to the knuckle. And then this piece of the hub drops on the spindle. And then this part right here is called a bull gear. You can see it has a bearing on the backside. That drops into the hub. And then this piece is called the planet gears. And there's 3 planet gears. And they call it a planet. You have 1, 2, 3. You can see the gears right in there. And then that drops into the bull gear. And that right there is called a sun gear. That drops in the middle. So then the sun gear turns to planet gears. Planet gear turns to bull gear, which turns the hub. That's how you get your gear reduction. Then when you're done, your hands are covered in old gear oil. Chicks dig a guy who smells like gear oil. So overall, this should be a very strong axle setup. There's a few different planetaries out there. So I run the Rockwell PS250s because they have very big internals. There's also Clark's, which are kind of the weakest. Pettibones. Pettibones have the largest spindle stock, but they run backwards, so you need a special or a different transfer case. But I prefer Rockwell's with the gear heart parts, makes for an indestructible, almost planetary. So because of that gear reduction, having the brake right there is called a pinion brake. And the reason that works so well and is so strong, and it has one in the front and one in the back, and it can stop a 12,000 pound truck, is because of that gear reduction. It has so much leverage over the wheels. So that's all you need for the brakes, is the one in the front and the one in the back, and those are manual. There's no power assist. But it has two master cylinders and one pedal. There's like a little balance bar in there, and you want it even split front back. I made that that's like a little dummy pedal just to rest your foot on. And if you notice in the front, there's these hydraulic cylinders. There's two in the front and then two in the back. And then there's this little gizmo right here. I'll explain in a second what that does. So for the front steering, you have a steering wheel just like a normal car. And right there is what's called an orbital valve that is connected to the steering wheel through a steering shaft. And then there's four hoses that come off of that right there. And they run into a pump right there that's driven by the crankshaft. So you can see that right there. Comes up to a reservoir. There's also a pressure relief valve. So that's the pressure relief valve, and what that does is if you hit something really hard with the front tire, like you go off a jump and you land funny, you don't blow a line. It relieves the pressure and puts it back into the reservoir. Now the rear steering, which is right here, is the same cylinders that the front have, but the rear is electric over hydraulic, and that's the motor right there. It's similar to what you would find in like a hydraulic liftgate pump, things like that. And this one has a really fast motor, so typically what I would do is I actually have a couple motors that go inside here that are rewound, but this one, factory, has a new style motor, and on 12 volts, this pump's really fast. A lot of guys run theirs on 24 volts, but no need with this one. Now this piece right here, which is made by Racehorse, it's got these two switches. These are Hall effect switches. And what those do is that's called an auto return. So the rear steer is operated by a toggle switch. So when you turn it right, so there's a couple ways to set it up. So the way I have it set up is when I turn the switch right, the wheels turn right. Some people like it opposite that, but when you let off the switch, those sensors read the location of that bar and it automatically recenters. If you didn't have that, every time you turn the rear wheels, you would have to turn the switch back to center. It'd be a pain. It'd be very confusing to drive like that. Electrical system in these trucks, it's pretty basic. I got 4 batteries wired to 12 volt. And other than like the rear steer pump, electric water pump, there's the auto return, some other stuff. I have a rear facing camera. Right there's RII. I'll get to that in a second. So there's not that many electrical accessories. Right there's the MSD ignition box. That's a magneto, and a magneto makes its own power. So the way that works, it's like a generator in there. So you don't need to run external power to that. It powers itself. You just have to make sure you have a good enough starter that turns it fast enough to crank the motor over. So wiring's pretty simple, but still, it took me a while to make up this wiring harness. I wanted everything run nice and neat, nice connectors, nice weatherproof connectors. So when I make up these wiring harnesses, I try to make them as neat as possible. And if you take a look at stuff I use, it's pretty cool. It's called Raychem DR25. I'll show it to you real quick. So this is it right here. This is Raychem DR25. It says TechFlex on the roll, but that's not who makes it. It's called Raychem DR25, and I usually keep a couple sizes, a quarter inch, 3/8, half inch. Those are like the 3 main sizes I use. Sometimes I get some smaller ones, some bigger ones, depending on how much wires are in the harness. I use a good quality wire right there. As far as connectors go, I always try and use good connectors. Like right here is like a GM weather pack. I use those in certain places, or I use what's called Deutsch connectors. So these are nice because you could take them apart a bunch of times. Just like these, when you separate them, sometimes cheap connectors can break, like the pins can bend and stuff like that, but with the GM weather pack or the Deutsch connectors, you don't have to worry about that happening, so I definitely recommend those. Sometimes I don't run all the wires in the Raychem, in the DR25, because sometimes it's nice to have them loose in case you got to take them apart, but for the most part, it's all DR25, and I get that stuff at a company called WireCare. So let's take a look in cab. So right there is the containment seat, and right there is the seat frame. So I built the seat frame. Right there are those ratchets. So those ratchets are part of the seat belt, and that's how you tighten yourself up. There's one on the left, one on the right, so it's dual ratchets. And this seat was made by a company called Richardson Racing Products. They make awesome seats. There's basically three: Richardson, Butler, and ISP. I prefer Richardson, but really they're all good. It's really what feels most comfortable to you. But you got your upper part for your helmet, your shoulder restraints, and they have you take measurements when you buy one of these seats. It's preferred to go there and let them fit it for you, but if you can't do that, you could just fill out the measurement sheet that they give you, and that's what I did. This thing's perfect. You can see right here the belts. These are from Hooker Harness. So right there, that little screen is a rear-facing camera. It's always good to be able to see as much as you can, so having that's awesome. That box right there is called the RII, Remote Ignition Interrupt, and I got that from a company called Race Radios. They're a little pricey compared to the other ones, but they're the best, in my opinion. What that does is when the truck's running, you just hit this remote and it shuts the whole truck up. That's probably the most important safety feature. Right there on the dash, you can see those two cables. There's a third cable to the left, another push-pull cable that shuts the truck off, but the one in the middle is the fire system. One on the right is the fuel shut-off. Underneath are just the on-off switches. Gauges right there. Right there is the shifter. Cheetah shifter. This is something that I do differently on this truck than most people. I put my rear steer switches right there. The one up front and forward, that arms the rear steer auto return. So you could turn that off or on, like if you want to do donuts, you don't have to worry about the pump stay running, so you turn it off. Then the back one's the rear steer. I prefer having it right there. I know it's kind of like the old school way of doing it, but that's just how I like it. It's what I'm used to. Maybe someday I'll put the steer handle up there. I've been thinking about making like a nice billet aluminum switch handle, but who knows? I'll see. Or maybe I'll have both, one there and one there. Why not? Right there's the gas pedal. It's a hot foot. It's got a tow hook. That way, in case throttle spring breaks, you could pull up on it. One thing I don't really like about that, though, this is a new design. It's got like a little rubber pad right there. So if you take a look, I made a little aluminum riser to put it at a better angle. But so that's got that little rubber pad on it. Compared to like the older ones, just all aluminum. So I might put this one in that truck. That's still pretty much brand new pedals. In one of my other trucks, I barely used it. Right up there is a really big transmission cooler that's made by Fluidyne. That's like a Baja cooler. It's like what trophy trucks use. So I mounted it there for a couple of reasons. One, I put it up high where it's out of the line of sight, so when you sit in this thing, it doesn't affect visibility. A lot of people like to put it under the floor, but to me it's kind of close to the heat source. Same thing with putting it up here by the radiator. You're close to the engine, it's close to a heat source. So having it right there, it's nice cool area, pulls a lot of cool air from the front, and it's a huge cooler, so having one should be good. But I'll probably get a transmission temp gauge just to keep an eye on transmission temperatures. So you can see from sitting inside this truck, with this body, there's a good amount of visibility. I notched away a little bit of the body right there, and you can look down through the bottom of the grill opening in the frame. You can see a lot where you're going. So trophy trucks bodies work nice on these things. I made like that little shelf right there to mount everything. So I tried to make everything as well thought out as possible on this truck. So just a couple other small things to do. I gotta do the drive shaft cages. I still have to make the rear bumper that goes right here. I'm waiting on that one push-pull cable. Should be here in a couple days. It already shipped. I'm waiting on the jack so I can lift this truck up to put the big tires on. So then I could trim out the body. I'm gonna have to cut those fenders a little bit. That's what my friend's gonna come and paint it. So pretty soon this thing will all be painted, lettered up, ready to go. So that's it for now. Take care. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you checking this out. So like, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment, share if you can. I'd appreciate it. Help me out. Take care. See you next time.